Good afternoon. This is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, the show that's trying to make the world safe for ADHD. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras, and I'm a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist. I'm in private practice. Easy half of my practice is ADHD, if not a greater percentage. And at this stage of the game, I mostly do evaluations, children, adults, pretty much the whole range. I'm not doing nearly as much therapy as I used to, but I have about, 38 years, I guess, of doing therapy with ADHDers. And I'm also the parent of a young, maybe not so young, an ADHD adult anyway. And while he was a kid, it was back in the days when we didn't know a whole bunch about ADHD. And I mean, I'll tell you, it was hard to get an evaluation. It was hard to find anybody who knew anything about ADHD. I, at one time, was able to get a couple of guys I knew pretty well. I wouldn't say they were friends, but they were at least acquaintances who had both done postdocs in pediatric psychology. And they were not helpful. They didn't recognize anything, and except that he was bright. Well, okay, fine. So, fortunately, as a psychologist, I knew how to get information about different psychological diagnoses, and so on. So I did a lot of webinars, a lot of seminars, a lot of workshops, a lot of reading, bought a lot of books, saw a lot of well-known people in the field speak. But before all that, I probably made every mistake you can make in the book about raising an ADHD child. I just didn't know any better. Who knew? He had older siblings. Whoops! I'm sorry about that. He had older siblings, and they were doing marvelously well without needing much of any effort. So I thought that's the way it was supposed to be. And boy, was I wrong. But I've been doing this show, if you will, for about 3 years now, I guess, maybe a little more than that. And I realized there's one thing I never really talked about, and it's kind of a biggie. And the deal is, people think about, they go get their child evaluated. The doctor gives them medication. Well, presupposing the diagnosis is ADHD, gives them medication probably. Maybe refers them for psychotherapy, which is an excellent idea. And doesn't really talk about the limits of what that medication can do, and what your expectations should be. And that's true. It doesn't really seem to matter whether it's medication or cognitive retraining or behavior modification, neurofeedback, which is a fancy word for a EEG biofeedback. All of these, and cognitive retraining. I forgot cognitive retraining. So, what do you expect from your child? Well, I think the big thing that you shouldn't expect, because you're not going to get it, is that your child is magically going to become neurotypical. That is, he's going to become like all the kids who don't have ADHD. That he's going to, quit having emotional storms, that he's going to quit doing things impulsively, that he's going to quit looking for a thrill by jumping off of high places and so on. Nope. It's not going to happen. Your child is never going to be neurotypical. And I think that's an important thing to understand, because I think the deal is that it makes it a whole lot easier to actually raise your child, to parent your child, if you have reasonable expectations. And I think that's one of the biggies that keeps you from having reasonable expectations, is that you're expecting your ADHD child to be just like your child that doesn't have ADHD. You're expecting that he'll all of a sudden magically, and you notice one thing: the siblings of kids with ADHD are always the perfect ones. They slide through school without having to make any effort, and they get great grades, everything comes easily for them. And then along comes the ADHD kid, and it's like he was some of you may remember Joe Blitzvik. He's kind of an old cartoon character who always walked around with a cloud over his head, sort of like Eeyore, where bad stuff was always happening. And the thing you have to realize with your ADHD child is that he or she is going to be different. And you have to learn how to embrace the difference and be happy with the difference. And most important is learn how to utilize the differences. Okay? The good news is your ADHD child is not retarded. Your ADHD child is probably brighter than average. Okay? My ADHD, I'm a psychologist, so obviously I tested everybody in my family, especially when I was in grad school. But my ADHD child was about 10 points higher on an intelligence scale than his siblings. And this is like, I've forgotten, he was out of the norms. I was giving him the adult intelligence scale, and I think he was like 11 years old or something. I mean, I was totally doing it. I wasn't going to use the information for anything. I was totally doing it just to get practice. But he popped like 124 IQ, something like that. And that's in the superior range. But he had the God's only almost horrible time in school. And it obviously wasn't that he wasn't bright enough. The problem may have been partially that he was a little too bright and recognized it. But that's one of those things that, as the parent of an ADHD child, you need to recognize and learn how to use it. Okay? Your ADHD child is brighter than average, typically. Your ADHD child is not mentally disturbed in the traditional sense of the word. He's not bipolar, he's not schizophrenic, he's not any of those terrible things that you worry about. He's a kid with a different kind of attention system. I like to think of it as an interest-based attention system. Dr. Mike Dodson is the one I know of that first coined that phrase, and I think it explains so much about ADHD that is sort of missing in ADHD doesn't sound like it should be much of anything. I mean, shoot, I've been distracted. I've been, lost my train of thought. That was a demonstration, by the way. Lost my train of thought right in the middle of a sentence. that doesn't sound like it's such a terrible thing. What we, fail to realize is that they have it to such an extreme that school becomes incredibly burdensome. I mean, these are bright kids. These are kids that are creative. They think outside the box because basically they were born outside the box. Okay? They have a horrible time doing conventional stuff. They have a horrible time doing stuff that other people think is important. If they don't think it's important, that's all that matters. That's as good as it's going to get. And that's the way it's going to stay. No matter what you do, your child is never going to be neurotypical. On the other hand, it's never going to be dull. I will freely admit to that. It is always going to be a little bit exciting, a little bit concerning, just a little bit scary on occasion, frankly. Sometimes it's just incredible fun. They are great at having fun, typically. And if they're in the right position in life, and they have the right direction in life, they can do really well. I think I've mentioned before that I do some coaching with ADHD entrepreneurs, and it's like those are people who have found a way in our society to succeed, to get ahead. They're terrible at doing just what they're told, just being ordered to do this, that, or the other. They don't resonate with that. They don't do very well with that. They do, however, do a wonderful job when they're in charge. And that's when the ability to think outside the box, the ability to make rapid fire decisions, the ability to hyper-focus and use your energy for extended periods of time, all of these things make them ideal entrepreneurs. And Ned Hollowell estimates that 80% of all entrepreneurs have ADHD. 80%, okay? And I would have to agree, though, because I go to a lot of conferences of people who are in the knowledge business or the internet marketing business. They're people who teach stuff, build products that are releasable on the internet. And most of the time frequently you're flying to California and you're there for 3 or 4 days of a conference that usually runs 8-9 hours a day. I guarantee you by the second or third day I have a bunch of people who start looking me up in the middle of a break or something, wanting to ask me a question about their ADHD or their friend's ADHD. And I said, I get 20 or 30 people at a time a lot of times. And I'm not the speaker there. I'm not speaking at these things. I'm just in the audience. But that just reinforces Dr. Hollowell's estimate. I believe, that these, if you are looking at entrepreneurs or you look at people who think outside the box for a living, whose job is to find new solutions, you're going to find a lot of ADHDers. Okay? Now, as the parent, your job is to encourage that and not waste too much time trying to make them neurotypical. Okay? They're going to have a hard time doing things just because somebody else is interested in them doing it. Bosses, teachers, parents, girlfriends, boyfriends, it doesn't, if they're not interested in it, that's it. It's going to be real hard to get them to do stuff. Or they're going to try like crazy and they're going to forget. And then they'll be off doing something else. And then they'll be really surprised that you're upset because you didn't do the first. They didn't do the first thing. That's ADHD. That's what you got to make friends with. And the big deal is that you've got to understand why all this stuff is, that it's not willful. I mean, I think the folks who have the hardest time with this are the obedience Nazis, the folks who just, I told him to do something, he better by God do it. Good luck. Good luck. You're going to need it. Okay? They don't work that way. And it's not willful. It's not that they're trying to disobey you. It's not that they're trying to get you angry or upset or anything. The brains just don't work that way. Okay? They just don't. They work pursuing what interests them. If something grabs them, that's what they go after. You know, it's kind of like at the Little League game, you know. The worst thing you can do for your ADHD little boys, little girls too, I guess nowadays, is put them in Little League, and then especially when they're young and haven't really developed a lot of baseball skills, put them in right field. Because at that age level, nothing happens in right field. So what do you do after about an inning and a half? There's your son sitting out in right field, looking at the ants that are crawling over the dandelion. And if the ball, unfortunately, happens to get hit in his direction, it's going to be like, huh? What's that? Why is everybody yelling at me? What's the matter? It's the way they are. So, you've got to know that, well, first of all, you've got to get a good evaluation to make sure that that's what's going on. And then you've got to learn to deal with it. Okay? And that's, depending on how you were raised yourself, that's going to be hard. Okay? I'm not joking a bit. It's not easy. You know, I think I've mentioned before on one of these shows, my dad was a drill sergeant in the World War II Army. Before that, he was in the Civilian Conservation Corps. So he had tons of years of military discipline. And he did not really put up with much in the way of disobedience or dilly-dallying. You know, if that was supposed to be done and he told you, you better do it. Well, that's not going to work with ADHD. And you're going to have to change, because he doesn't have any, he or she, sorry, I keep using he all the time, but most of the ones that have real hard times are males. The girls tend to be quieter version of ADHD. So they're the ones who come to my office when they're in their late 30s and just totally depressed because their lives are not working out. But usually they weren't even treated for ADHD. Anyway, that's a whole different story. But your ADHD child is never going to be the neurotypical child. He's in a society that values the things he doesn't do well. You know, school values it. A lot of the teams and sports value somebody who follows orders and is compliant and dip-de-dip-de-dip. And that is not going to be your young man or young lady. And sometimes I think we forget to emphasize that when we're recommending medication or recommending family therapy or individual psychotherapy, those kind of things. You're going to do what you're going to do at best is shave off some of the rough edges so your ADHDer can survive through. Okay, and that's part of the reason I wrote my book on strategic parenting. But I think I missed the boat a little bit because I did not emphasize this point. Okay, I was talking about remembering it's not so important whether they pick up all their clothes off the floor. It's more important what they turn into when they're 20 years old. That's the big thing you're looking for. Well, part of that is that you've got to work with them being ADHDers with an interest-based attention system and not a neurotypical kid. You are never, ever, ever, ever going to turn your ADHD child into a neurotypical child. Okay, neurotypical child is basically a fancy way of saying a kid who doesn't have ADHD. Okay, so that's my thing for this week. And I'm in the middle of a lot of projects. Gonna be looking at doing some online work, a couple of courses, and probably a membership group. But I will let you in on that as it develops. I've been doing this for a long time, and I enjoy doing it. But we aren't, I want to be able to reach a lot more people, and this will only take me so far, or take the whole ADHD world so far. So we gotta move on, and I'll let you know more about that as things progress. My website is terrygingrassphd.com. You can you can get in touch with me there. You can make comments somewhere below or over to the side. I can't remember which. Ask me questions. Ask me to comment on things. And if you would like to encourage me, you can do that as well. I appreciate the positive comments I've gotten so far. And I look forward to establishing dialogues with some of y'all. Okay. And we will catch you next time. In the meantime, this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, the show to make the world safe for ADHDers, because no conventional thinker ever changed the world. It takes all those outside-the-box thinkers, of which your child is one, to change the world. Because who knows, he or she may be the one who comes up with a solution to a lot of the world's problems. So, encourage them. Be impressed with their creativity. And we will catch you next time.